trying to.
Hard to do this with a big laptop. Oh.
Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing good. We're doing good. Had an awesome Halloween outreach from off our campus into the town. Yeah, we got to minister to a lot of people, so it was awesome. Preach to a lot of people.
Good for you. So I have a funny story. So my pastor is somebody who I've been working with on evangelism. He's come out a few times with us doing open air now, and like he really wants to do this with his church. And so he borrowed my basic training. He's been training on Wednesday nights, doing basic training for whoever wants to go. And so we're really getting a good push on biblical evangelism in the office. I'm sorry, in the church. So he bought Todd Friel's packs, for the buck a piece, the biggest question why,
right?
With the gospel tract and everything, and the $1 million bills, and so he passed them out to all his neighborhood kids, in his neighborhood on Halloween. And we did the same thing down in Medina. I didn't use Todd Friel's CD, or DVD, but I was just passing out $1 million bills and whatnot at my nephew's house, where we go down every year and on tracks. So my pastor texts me the next day, and he sends me a Facebook picture. I guess there was a big Facebook rant about people who are handing out gospel tracts to these poor little children on Halloween. That it's not the right time, not the right place to do it and everything. And one of the guys who just was blasting. Now, they didn't know it was my pastor who was doing it. They just knew somebody was doing it in their neighborhood. They knew other people were doing it in the Cleveland area. There's a pastor of a megachurch, a growing megachurch, who is an emergent church, complete bad gospel message and everything, gets on Facebook on this long message thread and starts blasting the people who are handing out gospel tracts during Halloween. Says it's not the right way to do it and everything. And then he goes, and I found one the same thing in a tip jar at Starbucks right down the street from my church, which is ones that we've been putting every time we go to Starbucks and different restaurants in the area. So it was kind of funny to see all these things happening, in the Cleveland area with these gospel tracts. But so it's a good time. It's been such a blessing because as I met Ricky Gantz and Austin Hetzler last year, and John Eckel, and we started hanging out more and going out together. And it's a far cry from where Ricky Gantz was the only one doing it years ago, and then Ben Adams joined him for a while. And we've got so many people now coming out and evangelizing with us. It's incredible. And they just went down to the homeless shelters last Saturday, and they had a group of 12 people at it, which was unheard of in just a year ago. So it's really cool to see God working in bringing more people together and whatnot. So yeah, it's been cool here. It's been going well.
Awesome.
You can start whenever you're ready, Anthony. Jennifer is still having issues, but go ahead and start whenever you're ready.
Well, I mean, I don't mind waiting for a few more minutes if it helps her.
No, just go and teach.
We're good.
I've been recording for the last 10 minutes. So all this is live and recorded and.
All right, cool. So are we waiting on anybody else to come into this or?
No.
No. Okay. And where do you want me to start from in the precept talk here?
Oh, that's cool. I think it's around page 85, around slide 85, I think it is.
In the beginning, God created.
So are you talking... Okay, I gotcha. Let me pull this up here. Is there stuff that you want me to repeat from before?
So a little bit of it, because that way this video would be, that way the video would include, it would just be, oh, this is how you use it, because that makes sense at all.
Okay. So I guess I will find where a good starting point is for this. That's the only thing I was confused on, is exactly what you want to be. Because I think the only thing that we didn't really cover, although we kind of, went through it a little quickly because of time, and all the questions. Yeah, I was getting ridiculed the entire weekend by Andrew and Frank, who kept telling me that I talk way too much and I go way too long. And I'm like, you guys were asking all the questions. It wasn't me. I had my talks timed.
Aww.
So, okay. Okay, I guess where we're going to start is we'll start with Romans 1, 18 to 20. So this would be at slide 52 of the precept talk here. And I probably won't go slide by slide, only because I think that if we're going to do some teaching tools, Jennifer, for your college students, it would probably be smarter to do this a little bit differently in putting videos together. It's something that I'm working on right now anyway.
Okay.
I can send it over to you, but so we're gonna backtrack a little bit, and then we're gonna do, I'm guessing, the discerning truth stuff, right? The
Yeah, like are you starting at like the API?
start the API stuff.
Is that where you're at?
Yeah, I'm gonna go just a couple slides before that then.
Okay.
Okay, so we're gonna start at 52, and then it'll get into the API here.
Okay.
Because to me, these are the parts that are really important. So, okay, so if we're recording now, what's that?
Yeah, we've been recording for a while now.
Okay, so I did my hair? No. All right, so I didn't put any makeup on. So okay, putting it all together. So we're gonna, when we walk into an encounter, this is where it gets important. When we walk into an encounter, we should have some things buried in our minds right from the get-go. The first thing that we should have buried in our mind is obviously Romans 2, verses 14 through 16. This is what Ray Comfort's ministry depends on, is the fact that all moral law is written on everyone's heart, right? So let me say it differently. Moral law is written on everyone's heart, Jew and Gentile. And so that we are confident in knowing that when we talk about sin, that people maybe won't be convicted right then and there, but we know that what is perceived in cartoons and on TV with that angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other shoulder, the conscience, is not just this fairy tale. It's not a human construct. It's not a societal construct. This is God writing the moral law on our hearts. And it's coming through when we challenge somebody with sin, and talking to them about their sin, talking to them about and appealing to the moral law that's written on them. So it's important for us to understand that every time we walk into a conversation. The second thing that it's really important to know is Romans 1, 18 to 20. And so, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. And so what this verse says now is that every single person knows the true God that exists. So whether they profess Hindu, Buddha, Muhammad, doesn't matter what, the Pope, Mary, it doesn't matter what they profess, is that they know the true Creator God that exists. And not only do they know the true Creator God that exists, they know that he exists by this creation, and that they know his invisible attributes, as God calls them, they're clearly seen. And so even his eternal power and Godhead, and that they will be without excuse on Judgment Day. So that's an important thing to understand, is that when we walk into this conversation, that every single person knows the moral law, that's written on their heart, and that they know the true God that exists. Going a step further is that they suppress that truth about God when they don't acknowledge the true God, or they, when they're acknowledging a false God or an idol, or profess that they don't believe in any God whatsoever, atheism or some types of agnosticism, depending on how they define it. But even then, whether they profess to be atheists or some type of agnostic, even if they don't profess in a certain God, they are professing in an idol, which is in turn a God anyway. And so it's important to understand that, and it's important to understand that they're suppressing that truth and unrighteousness. And so one of the best examples I've heard when you talk about how it's translated from the Greek and that suppression of the truth is, imagine you are holding a beach ball underwater. You're in the swimming pool, you're holding it underwater, and you have to actively force it underwater. And that ball, even as you're actively holding it, wants to pop up in every different direction. And you're constantly, actively suppressing that underneath the surface of the water. Jeff Durbin has an interesting one, too, that he'll use, because the beach ball scenario is one that, that Greg Bonson made popular. Jeff Durbin will often talk about a game of whack-a-mole, where you whack a mole down. You remember that game, right? Back at Chuck E. Cheese like 30 years ago. So mole would come up, you'd whack it down, another mole would come up, you'd whack it down, another mole. It didn't matter. I mean, you could have all your friends standing by, right? And you keep whacking all these moles, and yet they still keep popping up. That's the other way to view this. And so when we walk into an encounter, we know that they know the true God that exists. They're suppressing the truth about that God in their unrighteousness, in their sin, and that the moral law is written on their heart. And that's what we have to walk in and speak to in every encounter. And so that's, again, the most important thing. I don't want to belabor this too much, but it's the most important thing to keep at the forefront of our minds. And so going forward, one of the most important things I should say, the most important thing is not our apologetic walking into an encounter. It's not in how we're going to beat somebody down. It's not how we're going to win an argument. While presuppositional apologetics will allow you to win every single argument every single time, that's not the goal, obviously, right? The goal is gospel proclamation. And so we have to be mindful that when we walk into these encounters, that it's in humbleness, it's in gentleness and respect, and that the end game is not winning the argument. The end game is the gospel. And so the way that I look at it is similar to what Jason Lyle talks about and other guys, is that the whole idea of apologetics is to get somebody to close their mouth. We are showing why the worldview that they stand on, if they don't stand on a Christian worldview, which we're going to talk about here in a few moments, what exactly it is, they don't stand on a Christian worldview that God exists and that His Word is the Bible and it's true. If they don't, that's our worldview. If they're not on that worldview, every other worldview is reduced to absurdity. It's reduced to foolishness. And so our job is to get them to that foolishness as quickly as possible, for them to close their mouths, and that gives us now the opportunity to go and walk them through the law and preach the gospel to them. And so we want to make sure that we use gospel proclamation and apologetics together in that regard, knowing that the end goal, the end game, is always gospel proclamation. And so 2 Corinthians 10, verses 3 through 5, I think exemplifies this concept really well. For though we walk in the flesh, we are not waging war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but have divine power to destroy strongholds. We destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ. You're smiling, Ryan. Oh no, that's a still picture. I get it now. I'm not familiar with all this Google Hangout stuff yet. Okay. So what's really important is that when we do our apologetics, that our argument for God has nothing to do with our well-crafted arguments. that's where pride starts to creep in, and we can ruin encounters in this way. We have to make sure that the forefront of our minds is God. So if you remember 1 Peter 3:15, which is would be in the first half of the video, but 1 Peter 3:15, that we must always keep Jesus at the forefront. Most people, when they quote that apologetic, and I'm going to flip to this here real quick and actually read it out here. 1 Peter 3:15, most people will say, always be ready to give a defense to everyone who asks you a reason for the hope that is in you with meekness and fear. What people usually leave off when they're quoting this verse is the first sentence of that, which is, but sanctify the Lord God in your hearts. It means to set him apart. He is supposed to be, again, the forefront of our minds when we are giving our apologetic. And that we cannot craft arguments any better than what God did in his word, what he does in his word. And so we have to keep that, again, at the forefront of our mind. We can't reason to God. And so this kind of goes back over what we talked about in the first part of this, the theoretical part, is that there's no such thing as a neutral ground. There's no such thing as us being able to reason to God out of logic. God is our necessary starting point. And we're going to get into that here in just a minute or two. The whole idea is that we can't reason without him as our starting point. So we're going to talk about Spurgeon here, a quote attributed to Spurgeon. How do you defend a lion in a cage? You don't. You open up the cage and let it out. Let it defend itself. And that should be exactly how we defend the Bible. It doesn't need a defense, but it's that we let it out. We let the word cut like the two-edged sword that it is. So now, Jennifer, we're getting to the AIP test here that that you wanted to start with, but I think that everything else was necessary to back this up. When we walk into encounters, what we're going to find is that every single worldview, and this includes the Christian worldview, every worldview, to be completely true, must satisfy three requirements. Number one, you have to ask the question, is it arbitrary? If there's any arbitrariness in the worldview, it can't be right. And so when we are talking to somebody, walking into this conversation, we have to be mindful, again, of Romans 1, mindful of Romans 2, and mindful of figuring out what their worldview is so that we can go after the worldview the way presuppositional apologetics is designed for. And so is it arbitrary? First question. We have to find out if there's any arbitrariness in it. Because our beliefs must have some type of justification. You'll find that every worldview besides the Christian worldview will have some sort of arbitrariness to it. Is it inconsistent? You can't have two beliefs that are contrary to one another. This is where most of the world religions will fall real quickly, other than Christianity, because of the two beliefs. I mean, think about how we refute Mormonism or Jehovah's Witnesses or Islam. We're typically going after the inconsistency of their documents, right? Of their teachings and documents. That's what we go after. And then the third condition here is called, does it satisfy the preconditions of intelligibility? And so this is called the AIP test. Is it arbitrary? Is it inconsistent? Does it satisfy the preconditions of intelligibility? So what are these preconditions of intelligibility? This is these are the necessary things that we need to be able to make sense of or provide justification for things for logical reasoning. So, like laws of logic. Every worldview, for it to be correct, which again, the only worldview that's correct is Christianity, but any worldview to be correct must satisfy these preconditions. They must satisfy a way to have a basis for the laws of logic. It must have a basis for the uniformity of nature. It must have a basis for absolute morality. That's an easy one to go after. In Presup, I think that's the easiest one to go after in terms of the preconditions of intelligibility. Reliability of senses. reliability of memory specifically, and many others. These are all what we call the preconditions of intelligibility. These all must be satisfied. They almost have a basis within these worldviews. And typically, and I think I'll repeat this in a few minutes on a different slide, but typically when we're trying to figure out what somebody's worldview is, whether it's a false religion or cult, or whether it is a some type of atheism, agnosticism, naturalism, humanism, one of those types of things. Usually the false religions and cults, you're going to use the test for arbitrariness and inconsistency, and that's how you're going to refute those worldviews. Almost always, if it's not a world religion or cult, you're going to go after the preconditions of intelligibility. You see, and for example, like Roman Catholicism, is it arbitrary? There's some arbitrariness in it because of where they take doctrine from. It's not just the Bible; it's the Magisterium, it's the forefathers and whatnot. Andrew's book does a great job of describing this. Is it inconsistent? There's a lot of inconsistencies, obviously, in Roman Catholicism between the Magisterium's teachings, what the Bible says, what the church forefathers and the church history says. And then but look at the preconditions of intelligibility. Roman Catholics appeal to the same God. They use just about the same Bible. So do they have a basis for laws of logic? Absolutely. Same basis as we do. Do they have a basis for the uniformity of nature? Absolutely. Same as we do. Do they have a basis for absolute morality? Absolutely. Just like us. So the preconditions of intelligibility don't necessarily work on other religions. Does that make sense so far? So now we're going into a little bit more depth than what I had time for in New York, and this is to me the best part of the teaching is exactly understanding how these work against all these other worldviews. And it's something that took me a little while to understand as I was studying this a ways back. So moving on, how do we answer people according to the Bible? And the one that is always used by the pre-suppers is what they call the don't answer strategy, found in Proverbs 26, verses 4 and 5. Verse 4 says, "Do not answer a fool according to his folly, lest you also be like him." So what we're not going to do is we're not going to accept somebody's claim that they give us. When they tell us something, whatever it is, and I've got some examples coming up here, we're not going to find a neutral ground with them on it. We're not going to acknowledge what he says as even possibly being true. Do not answer a fool according to his folly, lest you also be like him. We don't want to take that step off of our worldview and go onto his side here. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. So verse 4 talks about how we're not going to step into his worldview and step into his whatever statement he made. Instead, we're going to say we don't accept this, and here is why. Show him the foolishness, show him the absurdity of his statement. And so oftentimes what this is going to look like is we're going to point out to the fool, I'm not calling him that, the Bible does, why he's wrong by reflecting his own philosophy back to him. So, for example, as we're getting to slide 62 here, the fool says, "I don't believe in absolutes." We can talk about the Bible if you like, but you cannot use absolute statements. So our job here is not to fall for his folly here, not to step into his world and say, okay, we can't use absolute statements. That's not what we're supposed to be doing here. So instead what we do is we say, I don't accept your claim there are no absolutes. We're not going to let him get away with a statement like that, a foolish statement. So we say, I don't accept your claim there are no absolutes. And then going on, you now can point out the error to him so he's not wise in his own eyes, as in Proverbs 26 verse 5 says. But for the sake of argument, if there were no absolutes, you cannot even say that there are no absolutes, since that is in itself is an absolute statement. Your statement is self-refuting. It leads to the conclusions that it can't be true. that's very long-winded, but it kind of gets the point across in that if somebody tells you there's no such thing as absolute statements, what are they doing? They're making an absolute statement to you. Our job is not to play nice guy and meet him halfway and talk about a different subject. Our job is to show how that philosophy is wrong. It's foolish. And again, the goal being to get them to close their mouth long enough to share the law, or go through the law and share the gospel. Moving on, what about somebody who says the Bible is full of contradictions, or the Bible has contradictions? We as Christians have great answers for this, right? We can walk through, you know, the issue of all these errors and how it's a fallacy, and, you know, punctuation and spelling errors, and we can talk about how it doesn't change doctrine. But the reality is somebody coming from that worldview, what have we talked about with evidences, and what have we learned already with evidences? You start giving evidence to this person, what are they going to do? They're going to slough it off, they'll make a different excuse. It doesn't work. And so instead, the way to handle something like this is to say, first of all, I don't accept your claim that there are contradictions. You know, we can discuss this if you like later, but I don't accept that claim that there's contradictions. But even if I did accept that there are contradictions in the Bible, why would that be wrong in your worldview if we're just rearranged Ponscom anyway? Right? So if we are, and this is something, Jennifer, we did several times in Cincinnati, right, when we were at the campus, is, you know, if somebody doesn't believe in biblical creation, the only other origin is evolution. That's it. There's only two choices. People will try to put a third in there and say that we came from aliens who dropped us off here, right? I mean, I've heard that before, but that's not a third option. If you came from aliens, what happened with the aliens? They were either created or they're products of evolution, right? And there's no, so they're just pushing it off in another galaxy. It doesn't change anything. It's either creation or evolution. And so we should always use evolution to our advantage. And so this is one of those cases. If they believe that contradictions are in the Bible, we can say, well, what's wrong with contradictions then? If we're just rearranged Ponscom, who cares? Doesn't matter. What about the fool who says you were lying to your kids when teaching them creation? Same deal. I don't accept that it's lying to my kids when teaching them creation. I'm not stepping into your neutral ground. I'm not ignoring your statement. I don't accept your statement as being factual. But if it were true, why would that matter to you anyway? Again, in your evolutionary worldview, where you have no absolute morality, we're just rearranged Ponscom, we're just random chemical reactions, you have no basis for lying, why it's wrong. Again, no basis for contradictions, why it would be wrong. So it's important to listen for those things, because you're going to find that almost everybody in a conversation, when you're speaking with an atheist or you know, a professing atheist, there's no such thing as an atheist, but a professing atheist or agnostic, you'll find that most of them will use a silly statement within the first minute or two of your conversation. I mean, it really happens that fast, almost every time. And so, you know, part of this is we're going to be listening for these self-refuting statements. What about somebody who says you can't know anything at all? I've heard this on the streets a number of times, or people in conversations. So you can ask them the question, well, how do you know that? If they just tell you can't know anything at all, yeah, well, how do you know that? That's a knowledge claim there that they're making. Or you can't know anything for certain. You'll hear that one out there. People will often accuse us Christians of that, well, you can't know for certain, right? And we've all heard that a million times. And we can say, are you certain about that? Shows the self-refuting nature of their statement. We talked about the absolute truth one. There's no such thing as absolute truth. There's a lot of people who say this. And so you say, are you sure about that? Are you absolutely sure? This is a good one, and I don't think that I explained this one as thoroughly as I could have because of time in New York. The next one on slide 66 is somebody will inevitably, if you haven't heard this already, people will tell you, we can know things without God. You know, especially if you get into some of the things some of the tactics we've used and I think we talk about those later in this presentation. But when you get to the point where somebody says, well, we can know things without God, or they can say some other statements that lead to reasoning, one of the things that you can say, and this works for a lot of things people will tell you, so it's one of those things to memorize and keep at the forefront of your mind in conversations, is how do you know your reasoning, senses, or memory are valid? When somebody is trying to give you reasons, when somebody is trying to reason against you, one of the first things that should pop up in your mind is, well, how do you know your reasoning is valid? Because our job is to show them that they can't know anything without God as their starting point, right? I mean, that's the whole basis of this. So when somebody is trying to give you reasons why you can know things without God, ask them the question, how do you know your reasoning is valid? How do you know your senses that are perceiving what you believe is reality are valid? And what you're going to find is that they're going to give you reasons as to why their reasoning is valid. Or they're going to rely on their senses as to why their reasoning is valid. Now, for us, we understand that because we have the omniscient, omnipotent, so all-knowing, all-powerful God, who's revealed some of His truth to us, we can be certain in our reasoning because we have the right starting point from the omniscient God. We have a God who's given us the ability to have our senses, and that we can trust, like in Proverbs 20, I think it's 20 verse 2, that the Lord gave us both the seeing eye and the hearing ear. In Job, it talks about us being able to rely on our brains for knowledge. Don't quote me on that. It's written differently than that, but you'll find that in Job. So the point is that if you ask somebody, how do you know your reasoning is valid? And then they're going to give you reasons, and you say, well, you're just giving me reasons to support your reasoning. That's a viciously circular argument. They don't actually have a basis for knowing that the reasoning is valid when they don't start with God. And that should become more apparent as we go on through this lecture. And then the last one I have on this slide is people will say truth is whatever exists, based on their senses, whatever exists. So you can ask them a lot of questions here. You can ask them, well, how does that work? You can ask them, well, how do you know it exists? And it's going to walk them back into their senses, what they perceive, and then you can ask them, now, how do you know your senses are valid? How do you know your reasoning is valid? So I hope this is starting to make sense. This is kind of the way we are bringing people back in, is always going back towards that AIP test. Is it arbitrary? Is it consistent? Does it satisfy the preconditions of intelligibility? Going forward, this is a funny one. Some people will say, well, I don't know anything. And you can say, well, how do you even know that? Some people will say, I know it's true by my reasoning. And just like we talked about, how do you know your reasoning is valid? They'll give you reasons, and you can point out the vicious circularity to it. And that's just really a small sampling of things that you'll hear on the street. But again, the goal is to go back to that AIP test and challenge them to the knowledge claims that they make. It's something that, without Sai explicitly saying that in his video, How to Answer the Fool, that's what he does the entire time, is he goes after any time anybody makes some sort of knowledge claim, and he challenges it. How about the most common challenge you hear on the streets? People will say, why do bad things happen to good people? or why do bad things happen, or why do children get cancer, or why do children die young, or you're going to hear all kinds of things. And what people are doing is they're invoking a standard of good or bad. Rabbi Zacharias will often, in a very sly way, and in his accent it makes a difference too in how he speaks, but he'll repeat somebody's question to him, and then he'll say, so by what you are saying here, you are invoking a standard of good and bad, or right or wrong, or good and evil, and then he'll hit him with a question, well, how do you have a basis for that? And so, for us, when somebody asks us this question, we need to have knowledge for ourselves about Genesis 2 and Genesis 3, why bad things entered into this world, because of original sin, because of God's promise to Adam that if you eat from the tree, you shall surely die, and that the decay process started in this world, all the bad stuff is going to come in. Those are things essential for us to know. Those are things that when we get into a conversation with somebody, thanks for joining us. When we get into a conversation with somebody, you okay? So when we get into a conversation with somebody, we can spend a few minutes talking about Genesis 2 and 3 when we find that they're sincere. Maybe after we've gone through the law, proclaimed the gospel, and then walk back to Genesis 2 and 3 and speak about why the gospel is necessary, why Jesus Christ had to die on a cross and be raised again, going back to the punishment that was promised in Genesis 2 and fulfilled starting in Genesis 3. So, we can explain those things, but really the way to talk to somebody who doesn't have a biblical worldview, who's going to make excuses for the biblical worldview and not wanting to follow it because they're suppressing the truth about God, the question we're going to ask when they bring up a standard of right or wrong, we're going to go right into the absolute morality issue. And so you ask the question, what is your absolute standard for measuring what is good and evil, or some variant of that? And what's interesting is that when you ask this question, there's only 4 possible responses that people can give you. Only 4. Every other response they give you will fall into one of these 4 categories in some way. And so we walked through these responses. Oftentimes, I've seen this on the streets a lot, oftentimes you'll find that people will literally go right down this list, number 1 through 4, before they realize that they can't come up with anything else. So the first response you could possibly get is from the unbeliever, I believe that the standard, the moral code, is based upon personal opinion. This is a very common one. And so when somebody says that, you can answer them by saying, well, wait a minute, how can you condemn murderers, rapists, and burglars then? Because if it's just their opinion, then how can you say that that person is wrong? They go rape somebody, that's their opinion. That was a good thing to them. You don't have a basis for telling that their opinion's wrong. That's an arbitrary thing. Same thing with murdering. That's a funny one where you can, when somebody says that, you say, hey, can I have your wallet? And if they give it to you, you stick it in your pocket. I've done that once before. Out in California, at the atheist table next to where Ray Comfort was preaching last year. It was pretty fun. And I took the wallet, and the kid was in a dilemma because he knows it's wrong, but he knows it just disproved exactly what he told me about personal opinion. And so he got a chuckle out of it when I handed it back to him. He understood the issue. He didn't repent, put his trust in Christ, but he got the point. So anyways, so possible response number 2, when you refute the personal opinion issue, they typically will fall into now the category, I believe that the standard or moral code is based on what benefits society. So not just what benefits me, which is personal opinion, what benefits society. And the response now is going to be, we can point to societies that obviously we would look at as being wrong. Okay, so in the past you had Nazi Germany. The society believed that they could do what they wanted to the Jews and Italians and other groups that they were exterminating. Obviously, you guys, Clifford and Andre, can say this about racism 50 or 60 years ago. I mean, think about society 50 or 60 years ago. Think about society going back to the 1830s and 1840s when slavery was legal, slave trade was legal. You could point to them and say, wait a minute, the society thought that this was okay. The vast majority of them thought it was okay. It was legal for how many years? It was legal for 100 plus years in this country, before we were actually a country, and for the first 70 years after we were a country. And so you can point to that pretty quickly and pretty easily. And almost everybody will falter at that and acknowledge that now there's a flaw in the logic of this issue too, with problem response number 2. So in benefit society, you can bring up racism and slavery. You can bring up Hitler, Stalin. I mean, there's a whole host of things that you can go after for this that are very clear to people to understand. Moving on, possible response number 3. So when a person goes from personal opinion to now what is benefits society overall, or what society agrees to, then they will move into number 3. I believe that the standard or moral code is based on the laws of society. Another very easy one to refute. Well, it wasn't illegal to, go to the racism thing. You can go to all kinds of things. Go to China about dogs being eaten there, dogs and cats being eaten there. We find that horrific, and yet this is what they do. There's cultures that eat horses. We find that horrific here in the U.S. And those are some silly examples, those last two. But the point is that you can do all kinds of things on laws. To me, the best one of this is this. You can ask somebody if morals even change. Because if it's an absolute morality, it shouldn't be able to change, right? So point out homosexuality to them. It was illegal 30, 40 years ago. Homosexual marriage was illegal till 6 months ago or so, 5 months ago, whatever it was. And you can point out there was laws in society. I mean, the state of Ohio, we have a constitutional amendment on our books that outlaws marriage. Outlaws homosexual marriage. And even though the SCOTUS ruling came out and is trying to supersede that, it really doesn't supersede state rights, and that'll be a fight going on in the future. But those are all the things you can point out to show why this possible response number 3 is silly. Going on to possible response number 4, and this is the last one they'll be able to come up with, is I believe that the standard or moral code is based on what makes people feel good. And so this is almost the same response as number 1, where you say, okay, well, it makes me feel good to kill somebody. It makes me feel good to rape somebody. It makes me feel good to steal things. It makes me feel good to take your wallet. Those are all things that you can go to, and they can't refute you. So what you'll find is that within those 4 responses, those are the things people are going to respond to, and you can easily show the foolishness in those responses. And I think that's why when you look at the absolute morality issue as one of the preconditions of intelligibility, that P part of the AIP test, this is probably the easiest thing to go after when you're on the streets talking with people. Do you have any questions so far, by the way? I know we're taping live and all, but although the last time I asked for questions in a group, it took me 3 hours to get through an hour and a half of presentations, and I got ridiculed, and still get ridiculed by Mr. Rappaport. You have no idea how many times I heard it this past weekend. I'm serious. Going forward to slide 75, which we had talked about already, when we are using the AIP test, you can use AI and P. Is it arbitrary? Is it inconsistent? Does it satisfy the preconditions of intelligibility against anybody who's evolutionist? And so that is naturalism, atheism, agnosticism, modernism, any other ism that you can put in there. They all use evolution as their mechanism. So AI and P all work against that very, very well. But when it comes to false religions and cults, you primarily have to use only the A and I, because most religions that at least profess to be the same creator God that we believe in, even though theirs is really an idol. They have the preconditions of intelligibility. They can appeal to the exact same thing that we can. So, or things that we can. When we refute evolution, and again, this is the big one, and I use this even on Christians who are professing Christians who believe in evolution. You walk through them with a series of questions. You say, okay, so you believe in evolution. That means you believe that we are rearranged pond scum. We're just random chemical reactions from pond scum through many life forms all the way to us. Is that correct? And the person will absolutely say yes. I've never had somebody say no and try refuting me on that, because they can't. I mean, it's evolution. So then you ask them the question, okay, so then that means our thoughts are just random chemical reactions, right? And obviously, in that chain of thought, if they're being true to logic, they have to answer, well, yes, we're still the product of random chemical reactions. That didn't magically change. And so then you ask them the question, well, how do you have a basis for labeling those random chemical reactions in your brain right or wrong, true or false? You don't have a basis for that. And so this works on evolution every single time, because there's nothing they can say at this point. You know, Seidenbruggen would go a little further. I don't think it's necessary, but he kind of makes a joke about it, and he'll say, you know, and actually Jason Lyles says the same thing. It's like, well, you don't get mad at baking soda reacting with vinegar, right? Like, it's not right or wrong. It just happens. That's the chemical reaction, right? Well, this is what's happening in our brain. And so when you hear Cy use the term brain fizz, that's what he's referring to, is a chemical reaction of vinegar and baking soda. So he calls, you just have brain fizz. So just so you understand that connection there. But that's really powerful in talking to the evolutionists. It's also, again, really powerful in professing Christians, because they have a major, major dilemma here. Did God really create them as a bag of random chemical reactions? How do you get past this issue of being random chemical reactions that has a soul, but this random chemical reactions can somehow learn? Like, it's a big problem for them, and it's one of the ways you can use to talk with them. When you refute atheism or agnosticism, again, you don't have to do a lot with atheism and agnosticism. They're going to want to challenge you to science. They're going to want to bring up a lot of things to you, such as quantum physics, quantum mechanics, string theory. And most of these people don't actually know this stuff. It's just stuff they've heard, and so they're going to throw these terms out at you. Go back to evolution. Draw them back to evolution. Ask them how they believe we got here. And then once they give you the joke that you will hear every single time, my mom and my dad got together, they usually are much more vulgar than that, then you say, no, that's not what I mean. How did people get here? And so you drag them back to that. One thing I'm going to say, too, that I think is really important, and I didn't really hit on this topic as well as I probably should have, only because it wasn't in one of the canned speeches that we had at Repentant Witness. But I did a talk this weekend that I prepared this weekend for Frank, and it's titled, "Is the Bible the Standard of Truth with Science?" It was something like that. So basically, he put a play on it. Does science prove the Bible? Is the Bible prove science? What is this issue here? And one of the things that I talked about in this talk was this fact here. Have you guys, and you can just nod since you all are on mute, but have you guys heard of DVDs like Eric Hovind preaches this, other guys preach this, that evolution is just a religion? Or they say that they're both religions, Christianity and evolution. You guys heard that at all? That they're both religions? No? So here's why he says this. And I agree completely with it, but I want to give you guys the background and the logic to this so you understand, because when we are refuting, when we're refuting these worldviews, evolution especially is a big one to hit. But let's take it one step further, because there's some people that maybe want a little bit of science, right? And so we can act really smart this way. We can ask them, and I covered again a little bit of this in our creation versus evolution talk at Repentant Witness, but I didn't go into really great detail. Ask somebody how evolution works. You would have heard me do this with the kid when we were at the outside of NYU. I don't remember which park that was, but it's the park that Jennifer said, I want you to get on the box and say, hi, my name's Anthony. I believe the Bible's 100% true. This Earth's only 6,000 years old, and evolution's a lie or something. And so when I got up there and we had some people come over, and that one kid who we were going back with, not the first one, but the second one, going back and forth with, I walked through this chain with him almost exactly. I think we have it on, I think we have an audio of this too that Ricky Gantz played on his program a few weeks back on GT20 Radio. But, and I can give it to you guys too if you want it. But so ask the person how evolution works. And they're going to throw out all kinds of crazy terms at you. Most people will not even get this right. Most people will say, they'll either try to explain a bunch of nonsense to you, about things changing over time and blah, 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 blah. And then you ask them for some terms, ask to get more specific. I mean, let them act like they're smart for a minute or so. Let them talk. And eventually you'll hear some terms like natural selection and adaptation and genetic drift and all this kind of stuff. But here's the reality. Evolution cannot work without one thing happening. All these terms that they come up with all point back to one central theme. And this is the devastating part about evolutionary teaching in school is that if they followed the logic train in science, you wouldn't even be able to teach evolution. It falls apart so fast. And so it's this. When you start talking to people and asking these questions, most of them will not be able to give you this answer. All of the stuff points down to mutations. The only way evolution can work is by genetic mutations. These genetic mutations have to increase genetic information over time. It has to increase, because the only way that we got more complex than pond scum, that we got more complex than fish, then we got more complex than whatever our ape-like ancestor was, is by the genetic mutations occurring and then them having to increase genetic information. That's absolutely essential. Now, let's step back for a moment. What is science? When people say that science absolutely 100% proves evolution, ask them the question, how do you do science? How do you come up with theories? Well, the only way that this happens is using the scientific method, right? And so what is the scientific method? The scientific method, in a nutshell, is you observe something. Let's say you drop the ball and hit the ground. You observe that happening. So you now are going to come up with a hypothesis of why that happened. Once you have your hypothesis, you now have to test your hypothesis. You have to come up with a well-constructed science experiment, test your hypothesis. Once you've tested it, you get results. If your results verify your hypothesis, you need to repeat your test a bunch of times. And so you have to have something that's observable, testable, repeatable, verifiable. Right? Or verifiable, then repeatable, depending on how you term those. But the point is that the only way you can actually call something a theory in moving through the scientific method is it has to be testable and repeatable and verifiable over and over again. Now, if you remember our talk on creation versus evolution, How many mutations out of the tens to hundreds of thousands of mutations that have ever been observed, how many mutations have ever increased genetic information? 0! None! Ever! That's not science. There is nothing scientific about evolution. That's the reality. And so we cannot let people get away with saying that evolution is a science, or it's scientifically proven. It's scientifically proven beyond a shadow of a doubt. It's not. It fails the scientific method test, which is the whole basis of science, going from putting things into theories from hypothesis. Evolution is a hypothesis, it's not a theory. And really shouldn't even be a hypothesis anymore because you can't. It's never been shown. And just to clarify now on this, and you guys can go back to my slides from before, but mutations, people will say things like antibiotic resistance, right? Or they'll say sickle cell anemia or pepper moth study. Those are not examples of mutations increasing genetic information. That is what we call a beneficial mutation. So all mutations have either are beneficial, they're negative, or they're neutral. The vast majority of mutations ever been observed are neutral. They don't cause any harm at all. We have them in our body constantly being made. So a lot of times they're negative, and sometimes, rarely, but sometimes are beneficial. But even in all the beneficial cases, such as antibiotics-resistant bacteria, those bacteria had a loss of genetic information in that mutation, not an increase. The loss just so happened to be a benefit. It was a loss of a port on the side of their cell wall that doesn't allow the antibiotic to attach to it, and that's why it's a benefit. It doesn't get killed by that same antibiotic. So you have to usually give antibiotics of a different class that attacks something different on the bacteria than what that port was. So that's an important distinction here, in that we can't let people get away with this stuff. So we can go after evolution and go over the absurdity of random chemical reactions, but we can also go after the fact that it's not science. And so that's where it comes from, is that in an evolutionary worldview where you believe in the Big Bang Theory, because they go hand in hand, you have to believe in the beginning dirt. We believe in the beginning God. Either way, you had to have something that was infinite, eternally existent, whether it's dirt or God. You can't. So they're both religions, right? And that's our job, to point that type of thing out. Does that all make sense there? Okay. So moving on now, empiricism. People. There are a lot of empiricists out there who say that you can only know or prove things through empirical evidence, things based on facts, evidence, and research, which includes our sensory experiences. We can go after what they say because they don't have a basis for facts, evidence, truth, knowledge. And so that's how you go after an empiricist. You can also go after an empiricist the way we just talked about with evolution, that if they really believe in science, well, you can't 100% believe in science because evolution doesn't follow science. The mutation part of it doesn't follow science. That's a made-up construct. You got to believe in religion there. So that's how you can refute empiricism. You don't come across that very often, just so you know. It's not really, to me, an important one. This is a fun one. When somebody says they're a naturalist is somebody that believes nothing exists beyond the natural world. So there's nothing supernatural. It's what we see, what we get. Everything you can feel, touch, taste, smell, experience. And that these people even go as far as to say that things like pain, pleasure, beauty, they don't even exist because it doesn't fit into their naturalistic worldview. It's really a self-refuting worldview because of those things. But the way that you can refute them is you can say, well, what about laws of logic? Because laws of logic, which we would all agree exist, things like the law of non-contradiction, right? That's the one where I can't be sitting here in my chair and sitting in my chair at my office at the same time in the same sense, right? That doesn't make sense. Well, that's one of the laws of logic. Can you touch a law of logic? No. Can you feel or see a law of logic? No. Can you hear a law? No. There's no naturalistic state of a law of logic. And so you can refute naturalism that way because they're trying to use logic with you, but they don't have a basis for logic. So that's how that gets refuted. You don't see this very often either on the streets or with people. Postmodernism. This is the most common thing you will see out there. The thing that is just permeating the church. You know, so it's not just on the streets, but permeating the church in America is this postmodernism. It is what has bred universalism, ecumenicalism, all this other junk that doesn't believe Jesus is the only way, right? Because in postmodernism, which is relativism, which is what almost everybody's a product of today, is there's no absolutes. You know, your truth is your truth, my truth is my truth. That's relativism. And you will sniff out relativism in almost every conversation you ever have with people today. Unless they come from not only a Christian worldview, but a very, very solid one, they're going to be a postmodernist. The moment they say that, you know, there could be other ways to God, you know, not just Jesus, they're in the postmodern mindset. I mean, think about how many professing Christians you know who cannot wrap their minds around the fact that people will go to hell but for trust in Jesus Christ alone. You know, that they still have this thing in them. Maybe it's because they've got family members that aren't saved or friends that aren't saved, and they don't want to deal with the fact that they're not saved. But you find this with a lot of professing Christians. So, but again, you're going to find it with everybody. Anybody on the street is going to have this postmodern thinking, unless they come from a solid, true biblical worldview, where we know that the only source of truth is whatever conforms to the mind of God, and he is not a postmodernist. So he's very black and white in what he tells us. And so that's something to know out there. One of the ways that I like to refute postmodernism, and you can come up with all kinds of things, is I will tell somebody, okay, so I believe then that the traffic lights that you see, that you stop at, are just, there's little monkeys in them that change the colors. And you know, I get a laugh out of it. The person who is talking to me, I kid you not. I mean, there's some people like, well, that's ridiculous. I go, but that's what I believe. And it shows them the ridiculousness of postmodernism. But there are people who stand on postmodernism so strong that they'll say, well, if that's what you believe. I mean, it's ridiculous, but this is what people do. And so postmodernism has infested people like a vicious disease, and it's our job, again, to point out the ridiculousness of it, and then to walk them, of course, into the law and the gospel message. You know, if somebody says, and so we're going to go into some more of these refutations here. Somebody says the Bible is not true, as in slide 82. Ask them, how do you define truth? As we know, the only way to define truth, right? Based on God, an omniscient being who's revealed some of that truth to us. Because if you remember, one thing we talked about in repentant witness is, and it's an example I use on the streets a lot, ask somebody how much knowledge of this entire universe they know. That there's billions of trillions of stars. How much do you know? And people will say, well, very little. And everybody will give you that honest answer. And you say, okay, let's just assume you know 1% of all knowledge. I'm giving you way too much credit. I don't know 1%, but let's just assume you know 1%. Ask him now, is it possible that of the 99% of what you don't know, could it refute the entire 1% you think you know? And if they're being truthful, they will tell you yes, right? Because what you don't know is what you don't know. Everything could be wrong, right? We could find out when we woke up in the Matrix one day. Now, we didn't because we know God. but I mean, that is a real possibility for people. It's an entirely real possibility that somebody has Alzheimer's that you're talking with. A person doesn't even, in a worldview that doesn't start with God, they can't even have a basis for knowing whether they are a severe Alzheimer's patient or not, severe mental illness patient or not, that what they're saying is actually truthful. And so when they talk about truth, you can go after this truth in this way. Is that person who says the 99% could refute the entire 1% they think they know, you can kindly point out to this person, well, you can't actually know anything then. Right? And so they will immediately say, but you can't either. They'll acknowledge it. They know that they're trapped. And so the first thing they do is they point back to you and say, well, you can't either. And you guys will probably remember, I use this over and over again in New York on the streets. And they'll point back to you and they say, well, you're right. So what we've established here is that the only way you can know anything at all for certain is that you either have to be omniscient yourself, you have to be all-knowing, or you have to have the revelation of someone who is. That's the Christian worldview. We have revealed truth from God, and that He is all-knowing. And so they immediately are stumped at this point. One of the things that's interesting as an aside, so you guys are getting a lot more now tonight, this is cool. So one of the things that, as an aside, because I've heard this objection a lot when I go through this, is people will say, well, you know, how do you know your Bible's true? And, you know, it had all these, you know, it has all these, not errors, but all these, you know, translations and blah, 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 blah. And so one of the things that you'll hear Cy 10, Brute and Kate do and establish early on in a lot of conversations, I usually don't. I should. I just don't remember to. But one of the things you can establish is this. Ask the person a question early on in your conversation. Is it possible that an all-knowing, all-powerful being could give His word to us through fallen individuals and preserve it for us to this day? Not asking them if it actually happens, just asking them if it's possible. And if they are being truthful with their logic, they have to say yes. It is possible that an all-knowing, all-powerful being could do that. So what we've done in this conversation is we've already established with this person that our worldview makes sense. Whether they agree with it or not doesn't matter, but it makes sense. It follows logic perfectly. And so as we go through a conversation establishing that their worldview doesn't, it only leaves them one choice. So do we see how all that is kind of fitting together here? So that's why you hear, again, that's why you hear Cy doing that a lot, but he never explains why. That's why he does it. You know, there are people who, when they refute you, will say, well, I need proof of God's existence. And you can say, well, proof, and we're on slide like 83 here, proof presupposes truth, logic, and knowledge. And then you can go through all the stuff we've just talked about how do you define truth, how do you get logic, laws of logic, and how do you have a basis for knowing anything? How can you make any knowledge claims at all? And you walk through exactly the stuff we've just been doing over the last half hour or so. But that's one you'll hear a lot on the streets. So I'm going to skip forward a couple of slides because I think we've explained those things already well. So we're going to jump into slide 87, refuting false religions. And so I have Mormonism in here. I don't have any others. My opinion is if you want to know how to refute religions, there's 2 books you should have in your library. It should be World Religions in a Nutshell by Ray Comfort, who I think does a fantastic job in a very concise way. The issue with this book is that it's not well, there's not a lot of documentation for it. It's a lot of his own words. There's only some claims that he brings in without really the proof of it. The other book that is excellent is Andrew's in you know, what is this called? Western Religions. I can't you know, he was selling it at Repentant Witness. I can't remember what it's called now off the top of my head. I've read through that already too. That's a fantastic book because, yeah, thank you, there it is. What Do They Believe? That's what it's called. The View on Western Religions. I like that book a lot. Now, it doesn't have all the religions in it that the World Religions in a Nutshell book from Ray Comfort does. What I like about Andrews is that in the 5 or 6 false religions / cults that he goes through, he has a ton of documentation supporting what he's saying. So he's not just telling you that the Catholics venerate Mary. He's showing you in Catholic catechisms where they actually say it. And so, you know, in your studies going forward, those are 2 really good books. I mean, it's impossible to memorize the whole thing in either one of the books, but to pull out a few points here and there, just enough to show somebody the arbitrariness or inconsistency of the worldviews, it's great. And so those are the 2 books I think everybody should have. Be mindful, whoever did Andrew's his proofreading didn't do a perfect job, so there's some errors you're going to find throughout. And I offered to help him with the proofreading on his 3rd run. But other than those couple of errors in the book, and the reason why I bring this up is not to poke fun, even though he thinks it's funny, it's that there are people that you will find on Facebook who are slamming his book, and they're doing it because of those errors. And it's sad because his content is superb in this book. So those are the 2 I would get. But anyways, you know, refuting false religions, we are going to show them how they violate the AIP test, especially the is it arbitrary, is it inconsistent. Almost always, it's going to be the inconsistency that's the easiest one to use. And so, like as one example, Mormonism, as we see on slide 88. Mormons believe that there are many gods, there's not just one God, and that you too can become the god of your own planet one day if you're, you know, good enough and you do all the things, you wear the special Mormon underwear and all that kind of stuff that they do. And so, yes, that's actually true. And so, yeah, that's crazy. So in Isaiah 43:10, you know, we know that God says that I am he before me, there was no God formed, neither thou shalt be after me. Very clear, he's the only God. None before, and there will be none after. Same thing we see in Isaiah 44, verses 6 and 8. And yet Mormons believe that there are many gods, that Jesus is just one of many out here. And so, again, you can find that in every religion. As we start to get to a close in some of this, Seidenbrunn has something called the 2-move checkmate. Number 1 is you say that's not what the Bible says. Anything anybody ever tells you, it's not what the Bible says. Number 2, how do you get truth without God? And that is literally the 2-move checkmate. And then once you ask how do you get truth without God, you walk right into your apologetic about how they get truth. Some interesting exchanges you guys can read in the slides on 90 and 91. I like to use 911 a lot. When people are heckling you on the streets while you're witnessing, ask them, why didn't you go to the mall and heckle Santa Claus instead? And they'll tell you, well, he's a fairy tale. He doesn't exist. And you say, exactly. That's why you're here. You know, point out the hypocrisy to them. So that's a fun one to use. I had some teenagers' jaws drop early back in April or May. We did it on the streets, and so that's a great one to use out there. There's one that Cy used where, and I'm paraphrasing this, but he was talking to a kid on a college campus who said he used to believe in God but doesn't anymore. You know, Cy asked him, why'd you stop believing? Oh, actually, the kid said, you know, I don't believe anymore, but I've been dabbling in Hinduism. Cy says, well, why'd you stop believing? And he goes, well, you know, my baby brother was run over by a car, and, you know, and Cy goes, so he says, so it's not the Hindu God, but it's the real God you're actually mad at, isn't it? Or something like that. He pointed out to and the kid actually broke out in tears. He was using the Hinduism to cover up and suppress the truth about the one true God. And so while it seems harsh, you can often point out those types of things to people when they make an excuse as to why they fell away from God. Say, well, is that why you were actually, you know, who are you actually mad at here? It's a very interesting one. I used something very similar to that to a girl at a bank, and she actually broke down in tears, the teller, when I had pointed that out to her. And she was very thankful afterwards, but she broke out in tears. There are times where an atheist will tell you, well, how do you know that God exists? And you play right on Romans 1 and say, the same way you do, except I'm following him. That often will expose somebody and the truth about them suppressing the truth about God. So we talked about the biblical principles already about our worldview. We talked about Romans 1:18-22, about everybody knowing the true God that exists. They suppress that truth in their sin. They'll stand for it on Judgment Day. The moral law is written on everyone's heart in Romans 2, and that there's only two worldviews, right? So remember, there's no neutral grounds. You'll often hear Jeff Durbin talk about how, you know, our worldview is, he stands on a chair in one of his videos. This is our worldview, Christian worldview. We stand on the Bible and its truth. The Mormons stand on their truth. The Catholics stand on their truth. And there's all these different worldviews out there. But we have to think of something else. I don't believe that that's the correct, and I would love to talk to Jeff about this in person one of these days, because I don't believe that's the correct way to look at this. I believe that while I don't think he knows he's doing this, but I believe he's actually going into neutral grounds when he says this, because he is taking the viewpoint of that other person that there's many worldviews. The Hindu believes that there are Sikhs, that there are Catholics, that there are this, that there are that, and Christians. But we don't believe that as Christians. What do we believe? We believe, like in Matthew 12:30, whoever is not with me is against me. Those who do not gather with me scatter abroad. Right? Those are Jesus' words. It's either you're with me or you are against me. Two worldviews. And so from their standpoint, there's all these different worldviews. From a Christian standpoint, there is the Christian worldview and everything else. For all that matters, they could all be in the exact same chair. Granted, they have different ways to approach each one of them based on their different beliefs. But from our standpoint, it's two worldviews. And we have to recognize that, because we have to make sure that we don't go into neutral ground. The reason why it's important is because if you visualize yourself on a chair and all these other chairs around, you can visualize yourself stepping off a chair for a moment to meet somebody. We can't do that. The moment you step off your chair, not only are you stepping off your worldview, which is the Bible, you are also stepping onto their worldview when you're in neutral ground. It's important to have that concept down. Does that make sense, everyone? Okay. Hebrews 11:1, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. We don't have blind faith. People accuse us of blind faith. On the streets, they'll accuse us of blind faith. We don't. We have a very reasoned defense. We have very, very reasoned faith. And it's our job to help point that out to them, too, why we have the hope that we have. And so you guys already know about repentance. I don't talk about that. And okay, so the last thing we'll say before I get into the logical fallacies portion, and we'll be done in a few minutes here, is that our job is not to fall in love with the apologetic method, just like I started off with tonight. Our job is to fall in love with Jesus and the gospel, but the apologetics should only be a way to get to the law and the gospel. Apologetics is not about winning an argument. We can win every argument. There's no doubt about it. But we can't do it at the expense of the law and the gospel. I'll share a quick story. I'm not going to say who this is, but while we were out at an event in the last 6 months, I was out with a very, very well-known street preacher in the country who's just learning presuppositional apologetics. He got into a presup talk, and unfortunately, I think, Jennifer, you probably know who it is because you were there. But he got into a presup talk with somebody for like 20 minutes. And he never got to the law and the gospel. This guy stormed off. He got so mad he stormed off. We never got to the law and the gospel. I actually chased the guy down the sidewalk and tried to give him the law and the gospel, and the guy wanted nothing to do with it. He left. And so it was one of those, I think it was a good learning experience for him. It certainly was for me. I mean, just as a good reminder of this, is that you do not get into this back and forth banter trying to win the arguments. You got to get to the law and the gospel. The moment they close their mouth, go right into the law. So I can't stress that enough. So let's talk about logical fallacies here. Do you guys know logical fallacies? Have you ever heard of any of them at all? Have you ever studied them? A little bit? It's probably a good idea to find a Christian website at some point and go through logical fallacies. Jason Lyle, I think, did an article on Answers in Genesis when he was still with them on logical fallacies. He has a book called Discerning Truth, which is a fantastic book. But if you buy The Ultimate Proof of Creation, his precept book, the last third of the book is essentially the same as his Discerning Truth book. You kind of get a 2-in-1 with that book, and so you can learn a lot of the logical fallacies in there. And so, why logical fallacies are important is because while it doesn't hit them the same way that precept does, it goes hand in hand in calling out somebody's problems with their logic. And so the first one we're going to talk about on slide 104 is called reification. And so this is when somebody gives an attribute, or so when someone attributes a concrete characteristic to something that's abstract. One of the ways that I kind of look at this one is if you remember, I don't remember the term, what it's called, but remember growing up and you were reading stories in like elementary school and it would say that the tree talked? You know, I think it's called personification, if I'm not mistaken. You know, you give some type of quality to an inanimate object that it doesn't belong to. That's essentially what reification is. So when people say, well, nature has found a way, or science says that evolution is true, science doesn't say anything. That's a logical fallacy to say something like that. Or people often will say, well, evolution explains this, or evolution explains that. No, it doesn't. Evolution doesn't explain anything. They're trying to give a human characteristic to evolution, which takes the burden off of them in explaining what evolution actually is. And so you'll hear reification all the time. There are hundreds of logical fallacies. I only put the top 10 in here in this presentation. You can get more in the Discerning Truths book. But reification comes up a lot. Then you have something called equivocation. This is where, on the next slide, when someone shifts the meaning of one word to another to win the argument. This is often known as the bait and switch. People will say things like, science is a powerful tool, so why deny the science of evolution? Science is a powerful tool, yes. But then when they say in the same sentence, science of evolution, that's not a science, as we have established already. You can't let them get away with that. Or they'll say evolution is a scientific fact. The evolution of bacteria becoming resistant is well documented. That's wrong on multiple levels. To me, the most common one you're going to get is not going to be one they say explicitly. It's going to be when they say, proof of evolution is the peppered moth study. Proof of evolution is bacteria becoming resistant to antibiotics. If you remember, we talked about two types of evolution, microevolution and macroevolution. Macroevolution is dogs turning into cats. Never happens. Microevolution is antibiotic-resistant bacteria. It happens. The bacteria, when they become resistant, are still bacteria. It didn't turn into a virus or a dog. That's not evolution. People will usually, why not usually, anytime somebody will give you science evidence per se for evolution, they are speaking of macroevolution, but the evidence they're giving you is microevolution. They're equivocating the term evolution there. This is the most common one you're going to get on the streets, in my opinion. At least until they get mad at you, and then you're going to find a few others they're going to give you. So the next one, called begging the question, it's when somebody merely assumes what he's trying to prove. Evolution must be true. After all, it is a well-established fact of science. They're doing circular reasoning here. We don't need evolution, or I'm sorry, we don't need evidence for evolution because evolution's a fact. You know, it doesn't make sense, right? It points back to the other. So you'll hear this one. There's other ways to refute it, but it's one that you want to keep your brain open for listening to, for hearing. We have something called the question-begging epithet. This is the most common one people use and get mad at you. This is when somebody uses biased or emotional language to persuade people rather than using logic itself. And so people will say, I used to have blind faith, but then I evolved. I used to have blind faith when I started believing in evolution. You know, persuasive language. They'll say creation versus science. Because they're now using persuasive language, a creation is not actually a science. So let's say creation versus science. There's people who will say creationism versus evolution, right? Because when you put ism at the end of it, it makes it sound like it's false. So let's say creationism. That is a question-begging epithet. They might swear at you, use vulgar language. That's a question-begging epithet. They'll say things like God is the most unpleasant character in all of fiction. You hear that one a lot, right? Or God is evil. They're using language, emotional language, to persuade you or other people around. That's very, very common. Something to listen to and call somebody out on it. There's something called a complex question. And we've all heard this one before, right? People used to say, you know, have you stopped beating your wife yet? Andre, have you stopped beating your wife yet? There's no way to answer this question, right? If you say yes, that you acknowledge you used to beat your wife. If you say no, I mean, you're still beating your wife, right? Like, you can't win. And people do this a lot. I mean, people who are smarter in their arguments will try to use complex questions to nail you. And so those are things to look out for. And so an easy way to define it is when they give you only one of two options, when there is actually a third or more options to answer the question. Or they just load the question up here. Loading is probably the better way to define it, because it can get confusing with the next one I'm going to bring up, which is bifurcation. So bifurcation is officially when they give you two options and there's a third. This is not one that's being is not being loaded the way the last one is. But bifurcation is somebody saying the traffic light's either red or green, when you know, and in fact, it could be yellow as well. People would say, I could never be a creationist because I am rational. They're giving you two choices. You're either a creationist or you're rational. And in fact, you can be a third option, which is creationist and rational. You'll hear bifurcations a lot out there. And again, I can't do this justice in just giving you one or two examples. Getting the book or going online and finding the lists and getting example after example is what helps cement some of these into you. Ad hominem is the most common one that Bill Nye used in the Ken Ham debate. It's actually it's probably the second most common one, now that I think about it. It's when someone directs an argument against the person rather than making a claim itself. So when people say something like, if you don't believe in evolution, then you are an idiot. Now this could also fall into the category of the previous one, or a couple ago, the question-making epithet. But there is a part of this that is an ad hominem. They call them ad hominem attacks. They're attacking you. The reason you believe in creation is because you went to church growing up. They're attacking you. They're attacking something against you rather than attacking the claim that you're making. So, like, when they say if you don't believe in evolution, then you're an idiot, they should be attacking you, or at least questioning you on why don't you believe in evolution. Instead, they're attacking you as a person. Does that make sense on that? Next one, faulty appeal to authority. You hear this one a lot, especially from kids. When someone endorses a claim by incorrectly using an authoritative resource, such as, well, I believe in evolution because Dr. Fred says so, and he's a smart guy. Right? You hear that one a lot. I believe in this because so-and-so said this, and he's a smart person. Evolution is true because all these scientists say so. That's a faulty appeal to authority. Just because somebody can appeal to lots of others who agree with them doesn't make the claim right, the knowledge claim correct. The next one, straw man fallacy. This is actually the most common one that Bill Nye used against Ken Ham. So this is when someone misrepresents the position that you take, and then they attempt to refute that misrepresentation. So if you acknowledge you're a creationist, and then somebody says that, well, you don't believe in science, you just believe in what the Bible says. Right? They're not actually talking about your claim on creation. They're attacking you and your belief in the Bible. That's what a straw man fallacy is. Creationists don't believe that species adapt over time because they don't believe in evolution. Again, they're attacking, they're misrepresenting what you said or misrepresenting what you believe, and then that misrepresentation is what they actually attack rather than what you actually believe. So again, that's something to read on for a little bit. And then the last one here is called the no true Scotsman fallacy. I've been guilty of this for years, up until I understood this is a fallacy. So when an arguer defines a term in a biased way to protect his argument from a rebuttal, how many times have we heard this one? The reason why it's called a no true Scotsman fallacy is because of the example that's always used, which is this one. Let's say somebody says, no Scotsman puts sugar on his pudding. Then the person says to him, well, but my friend Angus puts sugar on his porridge or on his pudding, and he is a Scotsman. And then that first person says, but no true Scotsman puts sugar on his porridge or sugar on his pudding, right? Then no true person does this. That's the no true Scotsman fallacy. this is a common one that we're going to encounter. A person says to you, no scientist believes that God created everything in 6 days. I would say, well, there's many scientists, including ones that answers in Genesis, that believe God created in 6 days. And they'll say, but no real scientist believes that God created in 6 days. So that's the no true gospel fallacy. Again, I don't expect you to learn those fallacies like this. Those are ones that you really do have to study and process and memorize. Like I made note cards for them so that I could memorize these basic 10. But there's a bunch of others. There's the red herring and all kinds of stuff that I never really bothered to learn because I don't come across them that often that it's really important. If you debate people or especially philosophers or philosophy students, maybe it's good to know more of those logical fallacies. But in doing what we do on the streets, where our job is essentially refuting false religions and evolution and spreading the law and the gospel, I think there's other things to study up on harder than all these different logical fallacies. So, any questions? That is the end of the presentation. Sorry, it went longer than expected, and Andrew, if he was on this phone call right now, would be ripping me to shreds. So, you guys, Jennifer, you're back. Andrew, you can take yourself off mute if you want. So I hope that's helpful. And
that was very helpful. Going in detail with those things was really good, because when I started going through it with the students, I was like, they were like, well, how do you use that? And I was like, don't. And so I realized, I was like, oh. And so what you went through was perfect. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. I'm glad it's helpful. So how's everything going with the students in teaching?
Oh, good. You know what? Actually, the funny thing is, the reason why I could bring this book up is this is what I'm teaching through right now.
Oh, cool. Yeah, seriously.
Yeah, so
yeah. I love the book. It's a good book. So, and when I told Andrew, he was horrified when I said this. I said, you know what I love about your book, Andrew, is that I trust that you did all those that you did the proper research. So I just read through all the words that you wrote, and I didn't read through all the proofs of it. Like I got through your book in like an hour.
That's awesome. Isn't it funny? It took him 2 hours to teach through Roman Catholicism, but tomorrow it'll only take me 50 minutes. Yeah,
you're a fly.
I don't know all those things either, right?
Yeah, I mean, in reality, that's all you need to do, and you just say, hey, if you want the proof, here's the proof. Go read it.
Right. So that's what I'm doing, is I'm just going through the sections where he says, this is what that says, you know.
Really all you need to do. Yeah, he was horrified, but, you know. But cuts to the chase, so.
I had one of the students show up at my Bible study, and she questioned everything, all the different religions. And I had Andrew's book, and I was using it, showing her all the information there, and she was so, like a sponge with all the information. I just gave it a book. I said, I'll get another one. Go ahead and keep it.
Yeah, that's nice.
I was teaching on what is it called? What Jewish people believe last week, and I had a young man. He was so mad. He was like, "Well, I don't think that guy knows what he's talking about." And I'm like, "He's Jewish."
Yeah.
He has an ultimatum. He has a plan. I'm like, no, I'm just telling you what they believe, because he felt like I was making Jewish people sound bad by teaching through that book, and I'm like, no, I'm just trying to tell you what they believe.
Besides that, now is this somebody who you just met on the streets, or?
No, this is a young man who has sound. He has sound theology. He's been going out and witnessing for a couple months, out and sharing the gospel. So.
Was he Jewish at one time?
No, which is even crazier. No.
So why does he think that you're misrepresenting, that Andrew misrepresented Jews in the book?
I don't know. I'm hoping he shows up in Bible study next week. So yeah. 2 days, I should say. Yeah.
I mean, what's interesting is that most Jewish people don't even, I mean, according to Ray Comfort's research, and I've seen this a lot, is most Jewish people have never even opened up the Old Testament. Most of them are by blood Jews. I think it's only like 10 or 15% of Jewish people actually know stuff in the Old Testament. It's horrifying. And so that's why I'm curious as why this kid even thinks that. For all you know, he has spoken to people who claim they're Jewish and have told him things based on family tradition of being Jewish without actually knowing what Jews really believe.
Right.
It's interesting.
Most of the Jewish people I've talked to, they have no idea what they're supposed to believe.
That's right. They don't.
No.
So I got a funny story. I can't say it too late here, but so and Jennifer, we missed you. You had no idea. We had such a good time during our college tour.
Oh, I wish I was there. I had issues and so I couldn't go, but I really wanted to be there with you guys.
Well, that's okay. We had 3 pastors that came out. My pastor did, Andrew's pastor did, and then a pastor that we know from Facebook came out with us. So 3 pastors were out witnessing. Number of people did. Between the 2 days, a number of people did. We were in conversations all day long. I mean, handing out tracts within minutes. You're in a conversation for 20, 30 minutes, and have some more tracts, another conversation. All day long we're in conversations. Had the cops called on us all 3 times, all 3 colleges, within the first 30 to 45 minutes. We used the same speech that we did at all 3 of them, which is, you take public funding, which means it's illegal to even have a free speech zone. We can speak anywhere we want on this campus, and they leave you alone as long as you're not hounding people. So there's this Jewish kid that I was talking to, and what caught my eye when he was walking by and went to go over and give him a tract is he was dressed like somebody you would expect to be pharisaical, like a Pharisee, and he had. I caught his dress and his Jewish pin on his lapel. What I found really odd about him is on his other lapel, he had a peace sign. I'm like, okay. I'm like, here's a gospel tract. I'm like, I gotta ask you a question. Why do you have a Jewish symbol and a peace sign? I'm like, they don't go together. He goes, what do you mean? I come to find out that he's in plays at Cleveland State University. He believes homosexuality is okay. He just doesn't know what to believe. He was Jewish by birth. And then he became agnostic for like 5 years. His grandma died, and he decided now he wants to become Jewish again so he can see his grandma again. I'm like, really confused young man. We had a good conversation, and he speaks in this really deep voice. You can tell it's a fake voice. He held on to it the entire 40 minutes of our conversation. He had a very candid conversation, very friendly back and forth. He's talking about his views, which were not very solid about being Jewish, even though he sees his rabbi every week. I asked him how his rabbi felt about him believing homosexuality is okay, and he's like, my rabbi doesn't have a problem with it. Like, okay, then you might need a new rabbi. So anyway, we had an interesting conversation. He constantly was saying Mazel Tov, which I'm guessing is something about, good point or whatever. I don't know. Mazel Tov the entire time. Towards the end of the conversation, I went through the law literally 3 or 4 different times with him and the gospel 3 or 4 different times in this conversation. The 3rd or 4th time I was going through the law, he goes, wait a minute, I have to ask you a question now. And I go, okay. He goes, do you believe abortion's wrong? And I go, well, yeah, of course I do. He goes, I'm like, it was almost like he watched a 180 movie. He goes, well, would it have been okay to abort Adolf Hitler? Would it be okay to make his mom abort Adolf Hitler? And I go, and before I could even answer him, he goes, how about if his soldier, would it be okay if his soldier just shot Adolf Hitler, before he could kill all of my Jews? And I go, and this is when the Holy Spirit just gives you the right answer, right? I go, you're asking the wrong question. I go, you asking that question is implying that God didn't authorize everything that happened, that he didn't know it was already going to happen, that he didn't allow the extermination of 6 million Jews. The conversation that was a very friendly conversation all this way, he got hopping mad. and then I go, I don't understand what you're so mad about. And he goes, you believe God will exterminate all the Jews For what reason? And they go, well, because, you kind of killed the Savior. And, like, that might be one of the reasons. I don't know. And I'm not saying that's the reason, but I'm like, because I should say one thing. He said, basically, what did God have against the Jews? I go, you guys handed him over. Like, you guys had the Savior, you're still looking for a Savior, and Jesus was the Savior. And then I go, but it's not like this is the first time it's ever happened anyway. He gets really hopping mad and saying, what are you talking about? I go, dude, have you read your Old Testament? How many times were Jews slaughtered by the Ammonites, by everybody else? I'm like, this is just one more time where God allowed the Jews to be slaughtered for whatever his great, perfect purposes were, But it was very interesting because this is a guy who is claiming to go to a rabbi every week. He looked like he was a Pharisee, acted like he was a Pharisee, and had really no knowledge of the Old Testament. I know. It was funny to share. It was just an interesting story to share with you. In one of the many things, like I so want to get back on Ricky's show one of these days, and we're going to do it. We just haven't planned when, and go over some of the conversations. Because there were some fantastic ones. I actually taped his entire recording. I told him I was going to tape the recording ahead of time. He had no problem with it. By the time he got hopping mad and was walking away from the conversation, he said, "You need to delete that thing now." And I just stuck it in my pocket. But yeah, it was interesting.
Brian had a conversation with a couple young ladies the other day, and they gave him permission to record, and then they called the ministry and were hopping mad, and they wanted me to make sure that Ryan wasn't going to play it. And then they called the university, and are all like trying to, cause us trouble with the university. I was like, oh. So, and I know it's those same girls, but what can you do? Yeah. So now Ryan's going to go meet with them. It's crazy.
He's going to meet with the administration?
Yeah. Because we don't want to have ill will with the administration, and he's got it. He's got the whole thing recorded, so he can say, "Hey, look, this is what we said." You know what I mean? Like, and she'll see, oh, it wasn't that big of a deal. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's fine as long as he doesn't give up his rights. What he doesn't want to do is put himself into their power position, and allow them to start dictating. And that's the thing that Ricky and I made sure happened correctly on this college tour, is that they weren't dictating to us. Like, look, this is your college, we get it, but we have rights too. Like, we're allowed to be here. We didn't like it all, but we're allowed to be here. We're not harassing people. We're not doing it. What I found interesting is at Baldwin Wallace, my alma mater, when we were a half hour or so into it, and security was called. Well, what was interesting is he just sat there, and he didn't come out of his car for a little while. We just kept on talking and preaching. And he actually came out and was talking. Ricky was the spokesman for us. He actually came over and talked to Ricky and said, "You know what, I got a complaint. I had to come out." He's like, "I sat here and watched you guys. You were doing nothing of what the complaint said." So he's like, "Just, you guys are okay." Came back out a second time about an hour later because somebody else had the exact same claim. He's like, "Look, I had to come out here because of the claim, but keep on doing what you're doing." And so, I mean, the Lord kept those doors open, and we didn't have many issues at all. Although the funniest part of it was in our first school, Lorraine Community College, which is a big commuter school. There's no dorms there. It's like 16,000 students, but because it's a commuter school, you're not getting a lot of traffic. It was the least amount of traffic of the three schools. Security came to Ricky, and instead of him just talking to security there, he went into the security office. And he was just texting me as time was going on, telling me what's going on. And, think about Paul in prison and how he spoke to everybody who would listen or even didn't want to listen, and he just was a jabbermouth. I mean, the pictures of Paul in prison are just hilarious to me. It's like, shut that guy up, and they can't shut the guy up as he's just blah, 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 blah. Well, this was Ricky in a security office. Anybody he could possibly talk to, he talked to. He kept asking to go up the chain of command to talk to each person. Finally, and he was in the office for literally an hour and a half, probably witnessed to more people in there than we did outside. all the way with chain of command, all the way up to the head security director of the college, who acknowledged that he has to allow us to do what we're going to do. And so, Ricky comes prancing back out there an hour and a half later, witnessing all these people and saying, well, we're free till noon, till we go to the next school. So, yeah, it's a good time up here. Have you planned to repent witness yet for next year?
Yeah, it's August 4th to the 8th. I haven't dealt with who's going, speakers or anything like that, but we would love to have you back there without a doubt.
Yeah, well, I mean, whether I'm just in the audience or you have me teach something, I'm okay to do whatever. But I want to go back. I'm excited to go back and preach again. But so now that we know what it is, are we confined to the small numbers of people still, like 10 guys, 10 girls, or whatever?
What I can do is we can go to we can stay at Nysum and not stay at that location, and then we can have more people. If
you have more people register, that is.
If I have more people register, yeah. And it has to be early. Enough people have to register early enough so I can get those spots over at Nysum. Yeah.
Because I'm going to work on some guys here, because I think Ricky and Austin are thinking about doing it.
Cool.
It'd be nice to get some more guys up there. And so I'm going to start working on some people here that maybe we'll all take the trip together.
Awesome.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm excited to do it again. And then there's something. What's that?
I was going to say, I can get up to 30 guys if we stay over at Nysum. So, but I have to get in early enough. Yeah. Okay.
Well, how early is early enough?
Sooner than later. It depends. It just depends on how many people are. Nysum fills up. You know what I mean? Both places fill up. And actually, I'm gonna in a little bit, in next month. I'll call the Chinese place and make sure I have that place. And then if we get too many people, then I'll have us go over to Nysum.
Okay. And then Andrew mentioned something about. Is there something going on in June or July?
Okay, so the one that's in July, that's normally the couple of days after Repent Witness, but this year they're doing it like a weekend in July. That is Jesus Loves Chinatown, and so it's about 10 or 15 people that would be in there normally for the English side. And so what you do is you teach through how to share the gospel. And I can help you do that. And then we take them out on the streets and have them go out and share the gospel. Yeah. So that's like 3 days of teaching and sharing the gospel.
Okay. Because Andrew brought that up to me, and so I didn't know exactly what that was. And I saw your email, and so okay. I'm just trying to get myself figured out now. So that's cool. Okay. Awesome. And then the last question I'll ask you guys then is how. Like the two things that are on my plate going forward now is, obviously, as you guys know, I'm working with Andrew now, right? And so, he's starting to mentor me and helping to build Creation Revival Ministry to spin me off in a few years. So I'll be working with Striving for Eternity on that stuff.
Right.
But it's mostly using what I have already to speak at. So that, other than the weekends away, it doesn't tie up my time. The two projects that I'm working on with you, Jennifer, is the Natural History Museum issue.
Right.
How to start writing this curriculum, and then, or not curriculum, but how to write the tour, but then also a creation curriculum.
Yes.
So, what is your vision on a creation curriculum? And I mean, too, if you have thoughts on this, is this meant to be like a 4-week course, a 6-week course? Is this meant to have like study guides? Like I'm trying to figure out what exactly we are looking for here.
Did I send you the template that we use, the teaching template?
If you did, I didn't see it.
Okay, I will send you the template, because if I would send you the template, then you would understand. Because this is going to be for campus leaders to teach their students, and so I have a very specific template, and so like 6 to 8 classes is plenty. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, and so if it's less than that, you know what I mean? And you're like, okay, you know what? I think we can, because the key is that I have students that go take evolution. They have to take evolution classes and stuff like that. And so they come to me and say, hey, we want, you know, I'm going to take this evolution class. I need to know all about evolution and how to refute it, and you know what I mean, to be able to do those things.
So basically, I'm going to fill out forms, and you're going to type it up then into the actual curriculum. Is that what you're saying? Is that how it works?
I'll send you a template, and when you see the template, it's like a 3-page template. It's very self-explanatory.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So my goal is to start working on that middle of December. And when do you want it by? Like, is there a certain timetable for it, or?
No, because I know you're busy, so just do it. You know, yeah.
Okay.
I'm not like, it has to be done at this date. I'm just grateful you're doing it.
Okay. So yeah, that's something I'm going to start working on now. I'm gonna talk to Mike Riddle and get some of his ideas on it, and I'll probably adapt a lot of his basic training into it, because I like he has things aligned. I'll probably add some of my own stuff into it that I think might be suitable for college students, because his is more of a broad spectrum thing, and I'll try to narrow it down more for the college age student then for this.
Okay.
So okay. So yeah, once I see the template, then I guess we'll get that started. The Natural History Museum thing, I'm still really tossing this around in my head. I spoke to Steve Policastro, Let Creation Sing. Boy, he needs so much prayer for this stuff going on. Have you heard from him? Have you talked to him at all? Do you know what's going on with him?
All I know is there's some health thing going on with him.
That's major. His brain is working very well, but he can't move very well. Like, he's confined to a lot of sitting. Like, he just is not moving well. And his voice, like, he can't speak. It's almost like somebody who suffered a major stroke. They can't figure out what it is. Or somebody who has, like, major MS.
Wow.
They have no idea what it is, what caused it. He literally just woke up with it one day. And, I talked to him about holistic medicine because I don't think they're going to get this treated correctly in traditional medicine. Like, with what they're trying to do and steroids, and it's not going to solve a problem. They're just trying to slow down symptoms. And you hear so many stories about issues in the gut being the problem, and needing probiotics and stuff, and you can reverse some of these things. And so he needs lots of prayer for him. But I did speak to him. He's very slow in his speech. Like, it's going to take you about 5 times as long in the conversation with him as it normally would have.
Okay.
But I spoke with him, and right after we did the Cincinnati thing, and he has other people willing to work on this with us. So there's a few he's enlisted. It's just about maybe us putting a Google Hangout together with these guys and putting some ideas together on how to do it. Okay. So, because that's the part that I'm just struggling with. I cannot figure this out, and I think I'll have a better idea in December when I'm back in town. I've been out of town the last several weekends now, and out of town this coming weekend. But I'm going to spend a Friday at my Natural History Museum here in Cleveland. I'm going to travel to Columbus's and see that one. I would love to, since my wife is now convinced from her sister that it's really cool to go visit the Grove City outlets, I think we may take a trip towards you to Pittsburgh and go to their Natural History Museum. So maybe you guys can meet up with us that day.
Oh, absolutely.
And I'll go through it, and all of us go through it together. And because I think that what we need to do is just try to figure out what the mainstays are, as we were talking in the parking garage that day, what the mainstays are among all the museums, and start to put together some type of general thing that people can use. And then eventually we have to reach out to people in every major city across the country and ask them to log what they see going to a museum. and then we have to go back and I think and write it out at that point. Or if we write out on like Microsoft Word documents, like you have T-Rex paper. You know, it might only be 5 lines, but a T-Rex paper. You have a
Right.
general dinosaur paper. You have a general rock layer paper. You have a general whatever paper. And so we might be able to put together a booklet just by cutting and pasting. Once somebody gives us the walk through the museum, they can create the outline for us, and then we just can cut and paste right into it. That might be the way to do it. And then we can ask Carl Kirby to give us all of his stuff and use his stuff into it.
Right. You have a bunch of his stuff, though, the stuff he gave you.
Yeah, but the only thing he really gave us, at least gave me, is his presentation for the Cincinnati Museum.
Oh. But
Yep.
are all the videos and stuff in that?
Some of them are embedded into it, yes. Not all of them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so
I
sounds...
gotta go, guys.
What's that?
I gotta roll.
He's going.
Well, yeah, I got to roll in a minute, too, so... Have a good night, Audrey. Thanks for
Good night.
joining us. Good night. It'd be nice to be able to contact Carl. He'd be willing to give us everything that he has to help start putting this together. I don't know how he is. You know, guys like Mike Riddle or myself have no problems giving everything away. Ken Hovind is the same way. He gives everything away. I just don't know if Carl's like that or not.
Right. All right, we'll see what happens. After December 5th, I have a lot of free time. So if you wanted to, so anytime after December 5th, you want to set up that would be fine.
Okay. Yeah, that's
Cool.
fine. What is the most important thing, do you think? Is it getting creation? Because I'm a guy, I'm a one-track mind type of. So,
that's cool.
do you think that maybe the creation curriculum is probably the most important thing to start putting together first, and then start working on the museum thing?
Yeah, because that's the one that will be used. That was the one that would be used first. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The museum part is a promise from me to Stephen that would happen. Yeah. But I think that's cool because when we do that, then I can walk students and we can walk people through a museum and say, look, you know, I think it's powerful.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And Pittsburgh is the one that's closest to you, right?
Oh, yeah. I've been there hundreds of times. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that should be one that we get started with soon. Then that might be one that, depending on weather, would be nice to do in like. My schedule clears up in January, but I have to be able to pull Julie away for a weekend to do this. My suspicion though is she may want to wait until the spring when it gets a little nicer to do
I
Pittsburgh.
appreciate that.
Yeah, so.
After February, like March, is the earliest you probably want to drive here.
Yeah, that's kind of my suspicion. So maybe that's what we'll plan on is trying to get something going on March or probably May, because April is what, Easter this year and Ohio Fire.
Really? Wow.
I think Easter is April this year again, if I'm not mistaken. But Ohio Fire's there, and then there's an apologetics cruise that we're going to be going on with Andrew, with M2M and Carm. So for us, it's going to have to be either March or May. But no, that'll be good. So okay.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Good night. Thanks for putting this together.
Oh, absolutely.
Bye.